this trip, I picked a lake and some waterfalls off the map that seemed pretty cool. But so far, I hadn't finalized the camping situation. So this spot near the summit on Highway 22 was a good place to pull over, look at the map, and make a final decision about where to camp, and get some shots of Three-Fingered Jack while I was at it. Marion Forks campground won out because it was right by the river with the waterfalls and close to Marion Lake. And as a bonus, there was a fish hatchery right next to the campsite. I've always loved fish hatcheries, ever since I went on a field trip in the 5th grade, and we visited one somewhere. I never knew exactly where, because I forgot the name and all the excitement about the fish. And we also visited a Weyerhaeuser mill that same day, which was also super cool, so, I just kind of forgot. And besides that, you really can't tell where you're going from the middle of a school bus with the steamed up windows that are only down a crack. Especially when you're chanting 99 bottles of beer on the wall with about 30 other kids. All I knew is it took about 2 or 3 hours to get there. Like all day. And as it turned out, this was the first fish hatchery I ever visited, the same one as on that field trip. I recognized the place almost as soon as I drove up, and it hadn't really changed much in all these years. So, after setting up camp, which was a convenient 400 feet up the road from the hatchery, I walked back down and was treated to an impromptu tour of the hatchery by one of the Fish and Game folks. And I learned a lot of things about fish hatcheries that weekend, much more than I did on my first tour all those many years ago. So what I took away from that conversation is that they raise millions of baby fish called smelt at this hatchery alone. Nearly 1.7 million a year, in fact. And they come from eggs taken from the stream that these adult fish are swimming in, who are at the end of their lives and about to spawn. The eggs are collected and hatched and then raised in these pools, and you were probably already wondering, wait, why are people doing this? Why don't they just let the fish do their thing? And to answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, back downstream, to explain why this fish hatchery even exists. And the answer is lights. Lots of lights. And blenders. And air conditioners. And computers. And, well, you get the idea. We people use a lot of electricity. So way back in 1949, they started building this coal-burning power plant to supply this part of the state with electricity. No, they didn't do that. Instead, they started to build this. This is Big Cliff Dam, which was completed in 1953. Besides producing 18 megawatts of power and making a nice lake behind it for people to go boating and fishing on, it's also a giant 131-foot obstacle to making it upstream, if you're a fish. Well, also if you're a canoe person, I suppose. But canoe people can just go up the road past the dam and put in again. If you're a fish, that's not really an option. No, if you're a fish, this 131-foot tall obstruction makes it pretty much impossible for you to get up and over the top of in order to get to your biological breeding ground that's been hardwired into every fiber of your very being. And so you're stuck. Canoe people, on the other hand, aren't biologically driven to make it upstream to their birthplace, so they can reproduce and complete their cycle of life. No, that's not the way it is with canoe people. No, instead, we seem to be hardwired, among other things, to create civilization, usually at the expense of other living things. We just can't seem to help it. But pretending we're a fish for just a bit longer, let's say the dam builders made a way for you to get past this obstacle by building a fish ladder for you, which they didn't, at least not here anyway. So let's say that there is a fish ladder and you get past this big obstruction. You can then swim into the lake and continue upstream for a ways until you get to here, where there's this giant 463 foot tall monolithic slab of concrete standing before you like a cliff. It's called Detroit Dam, and it features two 50 megawatt generators to run all those video games and electric garage door openers and lava lamps. It also makes this big lake to go boating on, and that lake also supplies water to the city of Salem. Look at the size of this thing. It's huge. Now that's pretty good for people, but not so good for fish. And so there is no way for the fish to get around these two dams. But don't worry, they came up with an app for that. Or a solution anyway. It's called the Mento Facility. Because people were like, hey, fish people, we know we blocked your path up the river, so we're going to give you a ride. All right, so Minto is located 4 miles downstream of Big Cliff Dam. The facility collects adult fish and releases juvenile fish in cooperation with the hatchery located upstream at Marion Forks, right back where we started. Some fish get a ride upstream, and some get a ride to the hatchery in these transport trucks. They're basically big water trucks full of water and fish. It's a lot like the Berlin airlift, only for fish instead of people. Now, the fisheries guy was explaining to me that after being hatched, the smelt imprint on the waters where they were born. There's a particular smell about these particular waters, the rocks and other things in the water that are just unique. And that's what they are programmed to get back to. It seems that these Chinook salmon, which are the fish we're talking about here, have a really good sense of smell. You know how a dog can smell thousands of times better than humans? Apparently, it's the same way with Chinook salmon, but they smell things in the water as opposed to you or I, who only get an unpleasant nose full of water when we try to smell it. You know what I'm talking about. It's also speculated that salmon might use the Earth's magnetic field to further aid in their navigation. The week I was there, the females were in the creek getting ready to mate and fertilize their eggs. So they're busy getting a spot ready in the gravel to lay the eggs in by pushing the gravel around with their noses, kind of like a bird in a nest. And I watched them do it for a while. Then once they lay the eggs, they get collected by the fisheries staff and hatched in these ponds. The smelt are raised in these ponds for, like I said, about a year or so, and then they're let go back downstream. And that's where they face a 300-mile journey downriver to the Willamette River, and then into the Columbia River, and on down to the mouth of that river at Astoria, and finally into the Pacific. From there, they do fish stuff in the Pacific for a year or two, like eating and getting picked off by seagulls and eaten by other animals, or caught by commercial fishermen. Now, some of these fish have been tracked to the Russian coast before returning back upriver in a year or two to be confronted with Big Cliff Dam or the Minto Fish Collection Station. Now remember, none of these fish have been here before. Out of the 1.6 to 1.7 million smelt hatched at Marion Forks, about 1.5% of those fish make it back. This is just one hatchery though. The state of Oregon alone operates more than 30 hatcheries, not all of them for Chinook salmon, like this one that raises trout. And this one that just raises more trout. Or this one that raises both salmon and trout. At least it did before this fire. I put some links in the description that show the locations of places in this video and a list of all the hatcheries, so be sure to look down there if you're interested. This fish relocation scheme started coming into play in the early 1900s when people started messing with the rivers. And as much as I like visiting a hatchery and seeing all of the fish, it would be nice if we didn't have to do all of this. On the other hand, I do like blenders and lights and stuff, and I think you do too. So for now, this is the way it is. And hydropower is a relatively clean energy source compared to a belching smokestack. So that's about it about the fisheries for this video, but there's still the other part about the waterfall and the rivers and stuff, which is why I came here in the first place. So let's switch over to camping and hiking Mento and see what he has to say. Thank you, Storytelling Mento. And hello, internet peoples doing internet things. As much as I would like to get into the third half of this video talking about the lakes and streams and things that were mentioned, I won't subject you to the pain of how long this video has already gone on. So I'm going to do a separate video. Look for the card up here someplace, and if it isn't there, go ahead and subscribe or do the notification, or whatever you like it, something like that. And if you don't like my videos, be sure to send it to somebody that you don't like, and that'll fix their boat. So until then, we'll see you next week or so, and have a good one.